Welcome and good morning, good afternoon, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from, to OAG's latest webinar. This time, we're going to take a look at international air travel, how recovery is shaping up versus key domestic markets, and take a look at some of the challenges that the industry is facing right now. So plenty to talk about today. And I'm delighted this morning to be joined by John Grant, as ever. John's going to share his insights and experiences. You've had some travel recently, John, haven't you? And you've got some coming up. And I'm sure you will not hold back in telling us what you think about what the state of the industry is.
Yeah,
we've also got... good morning, John. We've got two guest speakers today as well. Firstly, because you'll see his face on the screen, we've got Sandeep Bahl. Welcome back, Sandeep. You joined us earlier this year. Sandeep is an independent advisor and is based in Asia and has some fascinating insights to share with us on Asia and India specifically this morning.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Deirdre.
We're also joined, I'm delighted to say, by a first-time speaker on our webinars. Although I think you've joined us listening in before, Gillian. We've got Gillian Carr on the line. Gillian is Chief Marketing Officer for GMR Airports. Relatively new in that post, Gillian, although you tell me it's been 6 months. So
yeah, I've gone past the 6 months mark now, so that's quite good. Although apologies, I don't think anybody can see me. I can't seem to get my webcam to activate, so it's just going to be audio only, which is probably a blessing in disguise, to be fair.
Oh, great. Okay, well, thanks, Gillian. And we're looking forward to hearing more from you about your experiences and about your expertise in the Indian market this morning. Okay, let's dive in then, and we're going to show you some of our usual slides because lots of you seem to keep coming back, and we think that it's important to just have that sort of benchmark on how recovery is continuing or indeed slowing down in certain places. So we hit a bit of a milestone, didn't we, John, a couple of weeks back? Maybe a psychological milestone where global capacity weekly reached over the 100 million mark. And that felt like a sort of a threshold that we've been talking about for quite a long time. But we're still tracking below, aren't we? Certainly domestic is getting there, but international is behind, isn't it?
Absolutely. We finally last week broke the 100 million mark, as you said. This week we're at 102, so we've seen a bit more capacity added. Previous 7 or 8 weeks we've been sort of hovering at about 95, 96 million. And then lockdowns in China, in Shanghai, and then Beijing and other places kept setting us back. So to get through that point is really good. It's also really good in the context of the rates of cancellations of services we're seeing at the moment, mean we've got a 2% buffer that allows us to stay above 100 million real airline seats operated rather than planned. So it's it's good to be there. September. And if you look beyond the next couple of weeks, you know, we know airlines are still having to make changes to capacity. We've seen that bizarre and last-minute announcement from London Heathrow yesterday, where they've suddenly woken up and smelt the coffee, and are going to limit passenger numbers per day. That will impact about 1.3 million seats out of Heathrow in the next couple of months. So I think we should expect to see that dotted line come down just a little bit, Deirdre. You know, typically there's a 6% differential between September and August capacity and demand. So the shape of the curve at the moment doesn't reflect that fully, and it will change, I'm sure, in the next couple of weeks.
We're certainly seeing that. You know, the impact of that when we look back last year, which wasn't normal either, but was a little closer to.
No, and we shouldn't underestimate, you know, the scale of the rebuild in some parts of the world. I mean, this time last year, North America was almost back to where it was, and China, of course, was by virtue of having a domestic market, pretending it was back to normal passenger capacity volumes. But Western Europe, even now, you know, it's plus 100%, plus 200% in some country markets on capacity at this time last year. And just finding the resources to fill these roles is an immense challenge, not just in Europe, but in Australasia, in North America, in Southeast Asia. You know, we've just lost all of our industry skill sets, and they've gone to flipping burgers in McDonald's.
Not all, surely, to McDonald's, but you're absolutely right, John.
Oh, no, some went to Burger King as well. You're quite right. Yeah, I forgot.
That's it. Maybe KFC. Who knows? Probably better hours and better conditions, perhaps. Okay, we're going to come back in a little while because to talk about this operational disruption and cancellations. So let's park that thought for now, because I do want to talk a bit more about that. But yeah, let's move on to look at our next slide. So this is just our breakdown of what's happening regionally to really drive that recovery, and it's a positive picture, really, isn't it? Particularly China here, which, you know, we have seen really this roller coaster of capacity change, haven't we? That you referred to, with lockdowns and ongoing restrictions, and really this is the domestic market in China reopening back up again, isn't it? But there's a upwards positive trend, really evident, isn't there?
In every part of the world, I think we're seeing that. You know, and notwithstanding, there will probably be another series of lockdowns in China inevitably as they follow their zero COVID strategy. You know, the situation looks optimistic, and one of the reasons we're going to focus on India is, you know, specifically the Indian market has bounced back really, really strongly, and there's great opportunity there. I personally think it's the new China for the next couple of years. And that's where a lot of the action and the activity is going to be. That's why Julian's gone now, I think, because it's exciting times in India. What's happening? Yeah, I mean, guys, you're on the ground. I mean, it really is a hotspot at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally is, John. I mean, it's one of those markets which is just booming straight away. And actually, I think I saw some stats that India might become the most populous country in the world next year, ahead of China. So, you know, it's really growing. And then with all the dynamics that are going on in the industry here, with the Tata Group acquisition, etc., of Air India, that presents a very, you know, exciting playing field for the next few years. But I'm sure we'll come on to that in detail as we go forward.
And the timing's great, isn't it, from the perspective of all of those markets that have a huge gap in inbound tourism that's been emptied out by China being effectively closed, isn't it? So, you know, I think there's we heard a little bit about that on the webinar last month from one of our experts down in Southeast Asia, that, you know, there's huge potential and, I guess, appetite to understand the potential of the Indian market. So yeah, looking forward to digging into that.
Inbound tourism potential for India is massive as well. I mean, pre-pandemic, there was, you know, you probably remember seeing the Visit India campaigns that were heavily promoted around the globe to try and get people to visit India. And I think that's really going to emerge now as we go forward, because people who would have gone into some of the Asian parts, you know, there's alternative places they need to find. And India has a lot to offer, you know, with Goa, with Kerala, you know, with the mountains and the Himalayas and so forth. I think people are discovering that now. And the visa regime here is, you know, it's much more simple now. You know, e-visas are available to a large number of countries around the world. So getting here isn't a challenge either. So I think that, you know, and that's why the appetite is there to grow the carriers here. And the carriers you're seeing are focusing on the international markets a lot now, because they want to bring those passengers in. So it's got a lot of potential.
That's a real strength, isn't it? When you've got a market that has both outbound and inbound potential. From an airline perspective, that's good news, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what you need. Yeah.
I think one of, when we look at this data, one of the regions that gets buried or consolidated is West and Central Africa. And if you look at the African line at the moment, it looks a bit soft going forward. Well, that's partly because of what's happened in Southern Africa with Comair and their recent collapse. But West and Central Africa has been a real bright spot for probably the whole of 2022 in terms of capacity growth. New airlines, new services. It's been pleasantly surprising, I think, to see a region that for many years has been in the doldrums bouncing back stronger than pre-COVID, which hopefully it's a sign of future things to come there as well.
Absolutely. I think we'll all be watching that market with interest, won't we? Okay, let's look at our next slide. So this is really just trying to unpick a little bit about what's going on within domestic and international markets. Throughout, we've really seen, haven't we, those big domestic markets, perhaps with the exception of China, and the policy decisions there, I guess, about how to manage COVID. But we've seen domestic markets largely bounce back and recover. And I guess that's kind of evident in the global domestic picture, which is now just less than 5% below 2019, and in many markets, above that level. And international, as we said, still a way behind. Is this about unlocking China international outbound, or are there other stories in there, John? What's really behind?
A lot of it is about China outbound, Deirdre. It's not just China that is impacted because of this. If you look in Northeast Asia, airlines such as very big airlines like Korean Air and Asiana are still only at 60% of their normal capacity because they feed a lot of traffic through their Incheon hubs to and from China. So they're impacted. Similarly in Japan, even as far down as Singapore, which is a 7-hour flight to China. Let's not forget that. It's, there's a lot of impact that is still being hurt by what's going on in China, and with no chance really of that changing before probably April of 2023 at the moment, the way things look. So it's frustrating. Undoubtedly, international travel or capacity is also being hit by a couple of percentage points because of airlines having to cancel flights, not being able to operate to their planned schedules, and adjusting capacity even now for August. So that has some impact as well, but it's essentially China.
We're still seeing that capacity adjustment 4 to 8 weeks out, aren't we? 4 weeks ago, I think we saw carriers anticipating that July capacity was going to be 14 million higher than it actually now is. And that's still a big chunk of capacity being taken out of schedules at what would typically be, in the West, certainly the peak period. The time to make hay while the sun shines.
Absolutely. I mean, airlines went into the second quarter of this calendar year. Many were saying that they expected this summer to be the most revenue positive ever, not necessarily profitability, but certainly in terms of revenue. And I think that's been pulled back a bit by what's been going on. I think the second quarter of this year, financials, which people will be sharing this week and next week, certainly in the US and in Europe, will still look pretty good, but they'll have all cut back their production for Q3 and probably Q4. And airlines still are only really looking about 2 months out in terms of their network. The great unknown that that we've not really got a handle on is how much corporate demand will return in the next quarter from September onwards, if indeed it does. You know, it's been a particularly soft period for corporate demand. If that doesn't return by the middle of September, then the airline industry is going to be getting more and more concerned about how the last quarter of this year will look.
Sandeep, I'm interested in your thoughts, and Gillian too, on what you're seeing or what you're hearing in relation to corporate demand, because the sense here, I'm in the UK, and you know, talking to colleagues here and in North America, there's a sense that what we expected, you know, 10 to 15, maybe even 20% of corporate demand is just not going to come back. Is that your experience? You know, is there a different picture emerging?
So specific to when you look at demand within India or Southeast Asia, corporate demand is still slow. And the reason being, most of the corporate demand in India is driven by MNCs, and the local adjustment is still going on. And then in Southeast Asia, if you look, some of the economies in South Asia, like Sri Lanka and even Nepal and all, they're going through their own different issues. So that has put a little bit feeling in the market on a negative side. But domestic leisure demand, visiting friends and relatives demand, and being a holidays just finished, school holidays, that demand, as you've seen in the graph earlier in India, was a robust demand, and it continues to grow. I don't think the numbers are still there pre-pandemic. Especially pre-pandemic, there were some other airlines also flying and they folded down, but they are catching up to the pre-pandemic, and with Air India, as you said earlier, getting into the robust speed to catch up with others. On the specific to leisure demand and the corporate demand that's intertwined with each other, the MICE segment is slowly going to catch up. We see a lot of South Asian, East Asian carriers like Vietjet and all launching new flights into India in a big way. And the Thai carriers are also looking at launching more flights. And similarly, we'll see on the next, later on during the webinar, the Indian carriers are looking to grow their international footprint. So that's how I look at it. And the domestic corporate market is coming through, but I don't see the real numbers yet. And to be honest, you know, India market is all, there's hardly any first and business class, right? It's the number of seats are only 3 or 4%, so it gets very tricky to determine whether this is a real corporate demand or it's just a leisure demand trying to get it up front.
Yeah. And that we've seen that, haven't we, all over, people taking advantage, you know, of that situation, and quite rightly, you know, why not? Yeah, interesting. Okay, let's look at this next slide, which just really breaks down what we've been talking about from a capacity perspective, certainly for some of the biggest markets across the Asia Pacific region. And what we're showing is just a snapshot look at capacity in the current week by domestic and international, and just the respective positions of those, and to what extent a market is driven by the domestic share. And it bears out, I think, what just what you were saying, John, about the degree to which some of these markets are there versus not internationally. You know, there's still a long way to go for countries like Japan internationally, you know, which is still, to all intents and purposes, closed to mass travel. Not that it's necessarily a mass travel market, but you know, anything other than that sort of essential travel, I guess, is still not happening.
it's difficult to get to Japan, as we know. We've been trying. You've got to either have a letter of invitation from your company, or you've got to go on a guided tour, which is probably the easiest way to catch COVID, which seems a bit counterintuitive. But the big numbers are always the ones that don't surprise me, but just the reality of it. China, 112,000 international seats a week. That used to be nearly 1 million seats a week, and you know that's a huge loss to every one of those countries surrounding China, as we've said before. But there are other countries that are still struggling. Thailand, for all of its proactive approach to the recovery, is still down quite significantly on international capacity. But then again, much of that will be linked to China. Thailand was a very popular market for the Chinese outbound traveller, and that's not around this moment in time. So it's a really frustrating position, I think. And you know, many of these country markets have benefited from the fact that they did have relatively large domestic volumes in the beginning. So you know, India is a market, Japan similarly, Australia, despite its very strange approach to managing the pandemic state by state, is essentially one of the largest markets. And even South Korea, with its with the world's busiest route from Seoul to Jeju Island, continued to survive.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's turn now to Sandeep. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, no, I wanted to comment what John said. It's you know, when you look at Southeast Asia market and South Asia, China and Japan, they were big contributor to outbound or inbound into these countries. And the restrictions that China has with the zero COVID, even as of today, we heard about China locking up again Shanghai. So that will also impact on their domestic travel. You know, the domestic started coming up nicely, but if they put Shanghai on the lockdown again, that will be a big thing. And for Japan, for all the reasons, having a group travel, as Joe mentioned, that will create more COVID issues rather than, and it's getting difficult even to get into Japan nowadays because travel is zilch. But luckily, Japan just announced a little bit relaxation for US passport holders. So we are hoping they will slowly start picking up some other countries to open it up more for other countries also.
Yeah, John, that's the problem. We've got the wrong passports.
Yeah, we certainly have, in every sense of the word. The other thing I think we should shout out here, Deirdre, is Vietnam, because you know, in a sea of negativity, Vietnam is a standout positive case in terms of domestic performance and overall capacity, which is up by 11%. And it seems to have managed its way through the pandemic from an aviation perspective, perhaps better than many other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, let's turn now to a little bit of a look back. I was kind of interested in, you know, all we seem to hear at the moment, and you alluded to this earlier, John, about the industry, is the impact that operational disruption is having, certainly across many markets. This is a look back to a slide that we showed a year ago in our webinar in July 2021. And interesting, isn't it, that, you know, we were at a different part of, were we even in recovery? Probably not. We were tentatively trying to find our way forward. What is everything going to mean for the industry? And there were significant issues with staffing, with, you know, we've known throughout, haven't we, that we came into this crisis with a staffing resourcing issue, certainly on pilots. And I think you could almost just rewrite these, change the date and rewrite some of these headings, couldn't you, just now? And they're being exacerbated by that massive upsurge in demand for leisure travel that you talked about, Sandeep, and people's desire to get back to foreign holidays, visiting friends and relatives. And we're just, it feels like the industry is to some extent maybe didn't appreciate how much of a challenge this was going to be, you know, building back up. I think everybody looks forward to, you know, good times are coming, better times are coming, but actually there's a huge headache with all of that, isn't there?
You know, and keep going back to the analogy, it's really easy to fall off a cliff, but to come and crawl your way back up is proving extremely difficult for the industry. And you just wonder how we got ourselves into this situation, because I understand the difficulties of running these, you know, highly intensive, labor-driven industries, but we should have seen what was going to happen, and we should have been more prepared. But I guess the crux of all of this, quite frankly, is we've had it too good for too long as travellers, paying ridiculously cheap airfares and subsequently not paying fair value market wages in the industry for some of the jobs that are absolutely crucial to the operation of the sector. You know, we can't go on paying minimum wages or just above minimum wages as an industry for baggage handlers, for security staff, and all of the other roles that are absolutely, you know, crucial to the operation. And it's come home to haunt us this summer, big time.
And that's the crux of the issue, isn't it? You know, when I was talking to someone in Australia a couple of weeks ago. We've had conversations with people in the US and of course Europe, and that's the reality, that people who, you know, were furloughed or let go, who worked, you know, our sort of core ground staff right across the spectrum, left the industry in droves. And the prospect of coming back to a 4 a.m. start, you know, for not brilliant terms and conditions, is, you know, these people have gone and will not come back to the industry, and it's a huge issue for us, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and you know, it's compounded by the fact that in many communities around large airports, both husband and wife sometimes would be employed by the same company, maybe doing different jobs, but you know, taking a salary from the same employer. And COVID-19 and sudden redundancies and furloughs made people realize that was an extremely high risk position to be in. So there's a lot of families out there who are saying, you know, we can't both go back into that industry. It's too risky for our finances, with inflation creeping up, cost of living rises, all of the things that people are worrying about at this moment in time. So I think that's part of it. You know, the ridiculous situation in the United Kingdom, where you have to be able to prove 5 years of employment before you can get a security pass for, you know, many roles at airports. Well, for many people that means you can't even start working at an airport until you're 22 or 23. Is that what we really mean? Is that what we're trying to protect ourselves against? It's a very, very strange situation we've got ourselves into, you know, and it's going to be messy for the rest of the summer. And we've got some data that's being used by Sky News today from OAG that's highlighting some of the very, very high cancellation rates that we've seen throughout Europe. And I feel
you're stealing my thunder on the next slide, John.
Yeah. Well, sorry, it's just too good a segue. You know, and I feel for everyone who works at an airport, from the operations people who, you know, must be physically and mentally exhausted at this moment in time, trying to squeeze everyone into this tin pot of an aeroplane or whatever it happens to be, through to the management teams, those that are customer facing, it must be horrendous. And as you can see here, you know, it's not going away in the short term. We're seeing spikes in particular regions. And I think as we go into August, we'll probably see some more higher cancellation rates despite the steps that have been taken elsewhere.
I think that's the reality, isn't it, for many airports, that actually this is not a case of, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is, at an airport, the philosophy is generally all hands to the pump. So, you know, we know of senior managers who have been handling bags. I think we've seen pictures, haven't we, of pilots loading aircraft. Everybody is trying to make this work, and with resources spread as thinly as they are, you know, at some point something has to give, doesn't it? And that, I guess, is where Heathrow have got to. And where the UK authorities have got to in terms of, you know, politically, I guess they have to be seen to be taking action. But, you know, if you'd said to us back in 2019 that something like a capacity restriction would be placed on Heathrow at its busiest time of the year, we wouldn't have imagined that would ever be possible, would we?
And you know, we've got capacity restrictions at other airports, and Gatwick did it about 5 weeks ago, and I think Amsterdam did something similar about 5 or 6 weeks ago. I think the frustration is, you know, why did Heathrow not take that decisive step at the same time as others, but think that they were immune to the pressures that everyone else was seeing? Why did they think they were going to be able to recruit people when other airports couldn't? That to me is the real disconnect that I can't see in what we're seeing. But the other side of this, Deirdre, is let's put it in context. You know, these are excessively high cancellation rates by industry standards. But if my 7:15 East Grinstead to Luton train runs once a week, you know, that is exceptional performance. It is cancelled 80% of the time. And many other public service industries that have, you know, transport attached to them run with much higher cancellation rates and don't get the attention that the airline industry is getting at this moment in time. And we've got to fix it, and we will fix it. It will take time, but it's extremely frustrating for passengers. It's extremely frustrating for the check-in agent who has to face a torrent of abuse when you finally get to a check-in desk. But let's put it all into context. You know, it's not good. We know we need to get it better. We will get it better.
And I think these numbers bear that out, don't they? You know, actually things are better than they were last year, but maybe that's not a great measure. There is globally, certainly in terms of just looking at cancellations as a measure, we are seeing them come down again, and that feels like a disconnect with the media story. But the media story, I guess, is you know, is about reducing it to, you know, the individual cancelled flight. I think it's that balance, isn't it, between do we run the risk of having the need to respond and resolve this issue be driven and played out in the media? You know, the industry actually just needs to be able to get on and find its footing, and you know, get on with trying to recover, and get on with trying to restore connectivity to markets that haven't yet got it.
But it's not been an issue, or not been such a large issue in India, has it, Sandeep and Julian?
No. So
no.
John, you know, sorry, Julian, go ahead.
No, go on, Sandeep. You go ahead.
Yeah, no, what I wanted to say, Deirdre, what John earlier mentioned, our industry, airline industry or aviation sector, is the agility is not there. You know, it's so much constraints of regulatory and uncertainties is full of it, right? The COVID actually brought in some changes, as you know, contactless check-in counters and other measures are already in place. So using tech is great. But where the soft side, the security checkpoints, the baggage handling, the tech cannot do, you still need physical people. That we were not able to improve on, it seems like. I was the other day coming back from Sydney, the morning bank in Sydney, if you want to take a plane, you have to be there 3 hours in the queue for security. Just 3 hours on the queue, security queue. You know, you have this beautiful passport, you just walk in, immigration, no checks, nothing, you walk in through, but then you get stuck at the security, which takes almost 3 hours. It's the same thing when you, with the COVID things, you know, customers are canceling at the very last minute, right? It's not that now the testing is but some people are also get worried, right? Like, hey, I got a little bit fever, let me get my test done, and the whole crew, everything is shut down for next 5-7 days. So it's this what has brought to us now is these uncertainties which used to be there because of weather and everything else. This COVID pandemic thing has also brought another uncertainties, and that's where airlines are a little bit reluctant. The invested capital is already there, but these variable costs, they keep on creeping up without revenue flowing in through. So that's why you see a lot of cancellations coming, and the ground infrastructure, some parts is ready, but some part is still not ready. And it's the same thing you can see in India. Like, you know, there could be queues which can flow out of the terminal sometimes just to get into the terminal in the early morning departure times. Julian can probably tell you more because I've seen it in New Delhi as well. In the morning bank, the crowds are there. So
yeah,
Julian?
I mean, I think, you know, in India, I don't think we're seeing the same problems necessarily that is being seen in other parts. We are seeing it being busy, as those statistics are showing, which is, you know, to some extent is a good position to be in. We've recovered quickly, particularly in the domestic market, and passengers are traveling again. And we haven't really had the same resource challenges that have been experienced in other places. But, you know, we are experiencing busy terminals, and it is taking a period of sort of spooling back up to get that resource, you know, more used to dealing with that volume again. So it is going to take a bit of time, but I don't see our airports necessarily having the same complaint in terms of resource levels that have been seen elsewhere. I think the one thing to add just to those comments, you know, around resourcing in other markets is one thing we haven't really talked about is the fact that when we were getting all these staff were leaving our businesses and taking other jobs and going elsewhere, the express distribution market was going through the roof. You know, so a lot of these people who haven't gone to McDonald's, they've gone to Amazon. So actually, then you're in a world where they're working for Amazon or equivalent, and then they don't want to come back into this industry. So as John was saying earlier, there needs to be some degree of underlying shift to the overall model to some extent. Otherwise, we're going to really struggle to, you know, retain and recruit the people that are going to need to sort of support it going forward. I think the original question here, are cancellations here to stay? I think we are going to experience a choppy summer, of course. You know, we didn't expect this industry to recover to the level it has. I think, you know, as quickly as it has. 6 months ago, we weren't expecting this, and certainly a year, 2 years ago, as you said, you know, Deirdre, we wouldn't be expecting to be capacity curtailing because we didn't see it coming back. So it has caught us by surprise, but you know, now we've got to get through it. We've got to change the model in some way to make it more attractive for these people to work at our airports. We've got to, you know, deal with the processes to get it smoother. But I don't think they're here to stay longer term as a function of that resource. I think that will have to happen. And I think next year onwards, we're going to be in a better place. I think Heathrow, you know, and Amsterdam, et cetera, are doing the right thing in some regard because they're basically saying, look, we know we can't cope, so let's sort it out in advance rather than just having massive problems on the day, which has been the story so far. So, you know, the rights or wrongs are the way they're probably going about it, but ultimately trying to sort of put some degree of capacity control is important, and that will give some degree of certainty to passengers. But all the negative media we're seeing around the globe about all this isn't going to help the travelling public's confidence, and that's going to potentially suppress some of the demand over this summer as well, I think.
And that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah,
that actually, if your first experience of travel in 2-3 years is a fairly challenging experience at an airport, then you weigh that up in your decision making about the next overseas trip, don't you? And that's not what we want for the industry. We want people to have an experience.
I've experienced it and done it myself. I've I won't name airports, but I've looked at airports and, well, I don't particularly want to go through there right now, or which terminal actually in a certain airport am I going to look at flying out of, and you choose a flight accordingly because you know that particular terminal's got an issue. So if we're doing it, the general public passengers are going to be doing it as well, and I think we've got to be mindful of that. In terms of just understanding the impact that has on our overall demand. And that's not helping the airlines, because everybody's trying to fight for the business and to recover out of this. And then you've got the other dynamics going on around fuel price, etc., and all the political matters that are in the world. So we're certainly facing a bit of an uphill battle this summer, to say the least.
Yeah, I think in India, as Julian, sorry, Deirdre, as Julian said, in India, specific to when it comes to airports, but there is another issue that's going on, is with the airlines themselves. You probably have seen Indigo have to cancel about 50% of their flights because crew taken a mass leave. Other day we saw a report where the mechanics wanted to have, what has happened in the airline sector because of COVID situation. A lot of their wages were curtailed, the working conditions were changed. But now that market has, certainly in India, as domestic market has come back so quickly, the workers are asking to be given to what they were getting earlier, right? And those things are not flowing through to them that quickly. So there's even infrastructure is ready. There are a lot of new airports being opened. Even yesterday, there's a new airport being opened in India. But airlines themselves are struggling to get existing group of people continue to be motivated and serve the industry. At the same time, there's other airlines, the new airlines which are coming in. You will see it. They're also looking for people, and where the people are going to come from.
And it sort of feels like that.
If you have a trained person, you better take them rather than have 6-month lead time to train somebody. Dynamics that is,
And it feels like that's
what the new dynamics is coming in India market.
It's a positive problem to have, isn't it? It's the challenge of growth, isn't it? That actually is what is facing India. I think in terms of facilitating what we're seeing here. And I just moved, I moved the slide on here really to just focus us down on India. We are seeing, strong domestic growth continuing in India. We're also seeing capacity being added internationally, and we talked about that a little earlier, didn't we, in terms of the upsurge and interest both from an inbound and an outbound perspective. And I think if you look particularly at, who are the carriers that are driving international growth, obviously, the home carriers. But there's lots of interest internationally in India too, albeit relatively smaller numbers. But there's an opportunity, I sense, isn't there, here for Indian carriers really to set their stall out in terms of international markets and really start to grow that outbound and inbound potential, isn't there?
They have, the international market was effectively locked down until quite recently, and has only recently, just in the last couple of months, reopened. But the domestic market will reach, and is probably quite close to a point of saturation now anyway. So for Indian carriers, the opportunity is all of those international markets that other airlines have been warming up for them over the years, and low-cost carriers operating out of India, international markets. It's got to be a big opportunity, Julian. I mean, you must be excited about more international low-cost passengers coming through your airport.
Yeah, and I think you're dead right. And I think when you look at the statistics there about seats added, Indigo is unsurprisingly at the top. I mean, they have an order book that's coming out your ears. They're going to double their fleet in size by the end of the decade, 270 plus aircraft at the minute, with aircraft coming in regularly. And they have a good reputation in this market, and they are extending their footprint. You're right. The domestic market is, while it's I wouldn't say saturated, it's very busy and it's continuing to grow, and we're adding capacity more and more, and it's almost back to pre-pandemic levels, give or take now. So exploring overseas and growth in those markets are definitely, unsurprisingly, the way to go forward. Particularly some of the international carriers have had less ability to come into the market recently, as you said. So I do expect it's going to be a fascinating landscape going forward as Indigo try and stretch their wings into the sort of the mid-haul markets as you're seeing them grow into, and also the future with the A321XLR when it comes on in a few years' time, because that's going to open the door a lot further. I think we might talk about that a bit later. But the other dynamic is, of course, Air India and the Tata Group, because between those four carriers, Air India, AirAsia India, Vistara, and Air India Express, they've got over 200 aircraft themselves. So you've got these two powerhouses, both with two new CEOs, both with big ambition, that are going to potentially try and really segueing into the next slide there. There you go. Potentially going to try and compete to really grow their markets, not just domestically, but internationally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the new marketplace that India present, especially in Southeast Asia, or the unserved markets that we see from India, there are a lot of destinations which are not there yet. And the beauty is, as soon as the market opens up, the new planes comes in, you will find, and Indian travelers are getting very optimistic on travel overseas. A lot of countries have removed the visas for Indian travelers. I think it's what Julian just mentioned, the CEOs which are coming in, I think they are very well versed how to serve international markets, right? Campbell Wilson is coming from Singapore, which basically is an international market, and I think Indigo also is getting a new CEO who is from KLM, which is also very big on international marketplace. So I think internationally, India is at a very good spot, especially when you see there's a lot of unserved marketplaces. Luckily, I was looking at OAG has this route analyzer, and I looked at it, and there's tons and tons of marketplaces which are India is not even have a direct flight yet. Some of the places you have to take 2 stops to get to, and they're not very far away, right? They're pretty near. Africa is all open up. You got a lot of Central Asia is all open up. Even in Southeast Asia, a lot of destinations are not served directly from India as yet. So,
well, just to come back to Campbell Wilson and the kind of Air India proposition, what does the future look like? Have we got a crystal ball into Campbell's thinking? John, you met him relatively recently. Of course, didn't give away to you that this was his next move, but he's just in the door now. What can he do to, well, firstly, effectively compete against Indigo when we look at how much weight Indigo has in the domestic market, and that that's not where you would go, is it? But what's their niche going to be? What's the proposition for Air India?
He's probably got some great ideas, and he's already beginning to formulate them. Yeah, I had a great chat with Campbell, probably the last person to interview him in his former career. Would have been nice if he'd told me he was leaving. I could have got a scoop. But I think it's not for me to say, but if I was in their shoes, I would be looking to differentiate myself as much as I could from the low cost market. Getting dragged into competing with Indigo and SpiceJet and the new entrants with the low cost bases is not a space that Air India is going to be able to sustain in the long term. So I think it almost has to try and distance itself the other way and focus on network, focus on product quality, and try and attract back the corporate traveller who's going to pay a higher yield. It's a challenging task. It's not easy, but the thing they can't do is end up being a mid-market carrier with a high cost base. That is, you know, an unsustainable position, and we've seen many airlines in the world who've fallen into that trap. This is Air India's last chance, I think, and they've got to get it right. They've got a good leader to get it right, but you know, they've got to avoid interference from others, and they've got to be allowed to get on and do what's right for their business rather than what's right for India PLC.
John, I entirely concur, to be honest. I think, you know, you're right. What they don't want to do is end up being a mid-market and carry with a high cost base. Exactly right. You know, they've got a potential now to really, you know, it's high profile, the acquisition of this. They're being bought by a very well respected and large and well-heeled organization in Tata. You know, now's the time for them to really, you know, set the stall out and grow going forward. You know, there's rumors, you know, big order books, etc. You know, and I won't speculate on any of that and where it's all going to end up. But you know, if those rumors materialize, the airline's going to have, you know, modern aircraft, great potential to upgrade its product potentially. It's then got to focus on its brand and its actual product proposition in terms of, you know, delivering on that. But if they can get all that right, you know, and I believe there's every will in the world to do so, and let's hope they do, then they've got huge potential. And you look at the market in India overall, the geography of the market in India overall, and the potential, you know, in terms of the axis of the globe and how we can, you know, connect international to domestic and international to international as well, then the landscape there for them is massive if they get it all right. And, you know, I think under new leadership and new ownership, I think they've got good potential to do so.
I think one of the real interesting dynamics that will play out is we as an industry, we sort of tacitly accept that every nationality has a degree of brand loyalty to its national carriers or its locally based carriers. Now, as we get these new aircraft and the longer range and the unserved destinations, and those markets begin to be served by international Indian international airlines operating out of India, then they're going to attract a disproportionately high share of the market. And that makes me think, what does that mean for the Middle East hubs? What does that mean for Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and even Doha, who for many years have traded on connecting the Indian subcontinent with those markets in Europe? And, you know, through Fly Dubai or their low-cost affiliates in each country, they must be thinking, unless the market grows rapidly, there is a risk we're going to lose quite a lot of traffic that previously was ours. And that's a challenge. That's going to be a really interesting play in the next couple of years.
Yeah, there's a lot of passenger flows, and you'll know the stats pretty better than I. There's a lot of passenger flows that leave India to go through the Middle East and connect elsewhere. And actually, if they have the opportunity to go direct, you know, on a good service carrier with a good proposition, then they are going to orientate towards that. You couple that with the, you know, the strong building of alliances and the connectivity feed within this huge market that is India, with all the domestic operations, and even Indigo with its partnerships it's now got with, you know, Air France, KL, etc. That potential to feed hubs and feed Delhi as a massive hub, you know, taking that geography benefit into account, you're right. You know, we've got huge potential here in this market to compete with the Middle East.
And I think that I'm just going to skip forward some of these slides, and if we get time, we'll come back to them. That you know, I guess is the question. You know, from Delhi's perspective, or you know, India more broadly, what would that look like? What should it look like?
You know, I think it's interesting because, Julian, I hate to tell you this, but you're probably sitting at the last chance saloon in Delhi at the moment, because when Terminal 3 opened many years ago, the aspiration was to compete with Dubai and with the Middle East hubs. But for that to work, of course, you needed a successful airline who was growing and was credible, and all of the things that Air India wasn't at that moment in time. So, you know, it's interesting now. You're sitting perhaps at the right moment in the right space, because you've obviously got the airport, you've got the expansion, you've got, you know, a revitalized national carrier, and there's lots of opportunity to take share away from these routes and these hubs. You know, just timing, great connectivity, I think you're on the Great Circle route to Australia. You know, very well placed.
Yeah,
Just a matter of
it is. We're in a really good location. You know, geographically, when you talk about overflight from Sydney through to London, and if you take Perth through to London, you're flying directly over Hyderabad, which is another airport of ours. So, you know, we've got two good airports in India, both of which are well primed to capture those markets if we can develop those. You know, we will work with these emerging carriers, be the Air India, Indigo, etc., you know, to try and focus on. Delhi, you're right, we've opened a great facility in Terminal 3 a number of years ago now. We're just investing in Terminal 1 heavily. So by the end of next year, that in itself, Terminal 1, the new Terminal 1, will be a 40 million passenger capable terminal. We'll have 4 runways operational by the end of next year as well. You know, new parallel taxiways, you know, the list goes on in terms of our capability at an airfield. So we have the potential, we will have the capacity to handle this volume. So we are, as an airport, we are right in that location, right prime of our investment and our ability to handle whatever comes out of this Air India emergence and Indigo's aspirations as well. Now we've just got to work with them, you know, as we're saying, about getting that presentation on the global stage to actually make this become a reality.
Yeah, and you have legacy airlines who are much keener to experiment than they previously were. I mean, I think you've got Qantas have come back, haven't they, or are coming back?
Yeah.
And you know, it's timing is everything, really. And as I say, maybe this is the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And Qantas is doing Melbourne out of Delhi, you know, and I think ultimately we Australia is actually a big hole for us in terms of, other than that, you know, we have a huge market of Hyderabad to Australia, which isn't served directly. Huge market in terms of Delhi, which, you know, also goes into that region as well, which largely is hovering through KL and Singapore at the moment. So, you know, getting direct services into there, you know, the A321XLR will work for some of these carriers in terms of linking Hyderabad with the west coast of Australia potentially. So there's opportunities there, but in terms of growing the Delhi hub with these flag carriers and with the long haul aspirations of Indigo, or mid haul aspirations of Indigo, we are very well positioned.
Just thanks, Julian. We'll just go back a slide and look at that potential, because we sort of got our order slightly wrong in terms of anticipating where the conversation was going to go. But you know, we talked earlier about the huge potential for Indigo in terms of the volume of aircraft that they've got coming on stream. This just shows unserved routes within the range of those aircraft from Delhi. It's phenomenal, isn't it? You know, there's huge potential for growth.
I think it's fascinating when you see the density of the lines that sort of go off to unserved markets in Europe and then down into Southeast Asia, and what that means from a pivoting point of view in India, and what you could and could not operate. So yeah, I think it's, you know, it's a rich opportunity. The other thing that, in a broader context, that just these numbers show me is, you know, we've got 540 aircraft on order in India. The Chinese, and they're mainly narrow-bodied, long-range aircraft. We've got the Chinese last week who announced an order for 320 single-aisle Airbus aircraft, long-range. And so we've got growth in China in terms of fleet deliveries, and in India, and we've not even spoken about Saudi Arabia, where, you know, the 2050 vision requires literally hundreds and hundreds of single-aisle aircraft orders to be placed to achieve their objective, and they haven't placed one order at this moment in time beyond 2024. Next week is Farnborough. They may make some big announcement there about what they're going to order, and what the airline's going to shape up with. But as an aircraft manufacturer, you know, your order books must be absolutely full at this moment in time and brimming. And non-delivery on time is probably going to be an issue for airlines in 3 or 4 years' time, because there's just so many airlines who are looking for these new aircraft.
There's an idea for our next webinar guest, John.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm conscious that we're just almost out of time. I feel like we could probably spend a fair amount more time talking about the opportunity. Sandeep, any final reflections from you?
No, thanks, Jerry. As specific to when it comes to India and the Southeast Asia, there are opportunities that are coming through. We see its potential because not only the market itself in India is developing, the middle class is growing, markets which have slowed down, they are looking at India to support them with the growth. The number of aircraft that John mentioned coming into India, even China and Australia, you see recently even Qantas has announced some more narrow bodies coming into there, and the long haul. The hub specific to what I want to say here, India really has to focus first on domestic to domestic rather than international to international demand. Putting that demand hub, the local demand, then putting them onto international flight within the legacy national carriers help better than going after the international competitor from day one. It gets a little bit tough. And India has this unique position. And as Julian mentioned, both Delhi airport and Hyderabad and other airports in India can develop themselves into a good domestic to domestic and domestic to international hub. And that we have to get them through.
Thanks, Sandeep. And Julian, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, just to sort of summarize, I think, yes, you're right. When we talked earlier on about capacity and challenges this summer, yeah, it's going to be a blip. It's going to be a bit messy here and there, but ultimately, I do think we'll ride it through. There will be structural changes underneath that we really need to see play through, but hopefully by next summer, that'll have recovered. And you look at the growth trajectory as the markets of passenger demand is coming back, that should come back as well. We've got corporate travelers are starting to travel, premium economy cabins, which we haven't talked about, which are really beginning to boom as well as people upgrade themselves slightly. So, I am cautiously optimistic. If I put my group hat on for GMR, we are very optimistic. We've talked about Delhi and Hyderabad, but we've also got, a new airport in Goa we're opening later this year, which is going to be, primarily serving that market, and that's got huge potential for inbound tourism as we try and grow our Indian marketplace. And we've also, just last week signed and taken over management control of Medan in Indonesia. So again, another huge market, which we, in its own right, it's got massive potential for growth. So as a group, we've got an ability to try and connect all those dots and try and position ourselves well with all these carriers which have got ambition to come out of this pandemic. So no, that's where we are.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Julian. Sounds like there's plenty to go for, plenty of opportunity for you in the months ahead. I'm sure the next 6 months will probably go as quickly as the last 6 months have. John, anything, and good luck with that. John, anything in closing from you?
Well, a couple of things, I suppose. It's good the next webinar is the 14th of September, because by then we should be past all of this, and we can look forward, which is positive. And I guess the other thing is, I just really don't know whether I should look for a career flipping burgers, trying to find a white van and making deliveries, or hiring or taking a uniform from an airport and becoming a security person. But it's challenging times for the industry, that's for sure, but we will get there. Just remember, over 80 years we've been remarkably resilient, and this is just another bump in the road.
I think you're thanks, John. I think you're far too long in this industry to get out now. But anyway, on that parting note, thank you everybody. Thanks for your engagement and interest. We regularly, and there've been some links in the chat that you'll have seen. We regularly comment on industry developments, and you can follow those stories by looking at OAG's blog. We're still producing regular updates on the recovery from COVID-19, so you can keep an eye on that too. We'll be back in mid-September, as John said, and we look forward to seeing as many of you as want to come back, our regular listeners, as are able to join us. So thanks everybody, thanks to our guests for joining us today, and have a great day everybody.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.